Hello and welcome to Fantastic Fights, the podcast about a middle-aged man playing adventure game books out loud on the internet. That middle-aged man is me, Hieronymus J. Doom, and this is another bonus episode made possible by my kind patrons over at patreon.com/HJDoom. This time we're playing a Dave Morris gamebook, The Castle of Lost Souls. This is a reprint of a gamebook from 1985, part of the Golden Dragon series, which was pitched as a direct competitor to Fighting Fantasy. Given that Dave Morris only wrote one official Fighting Fantasy book, the generally solid Keep of the Lich Lord, this is a chance to find out what else he might have done in the same space given the opportunity. The Castle of Lost Souls was adapted from a serialised adventure for Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, which was published in Games Workshop's White Dwarf magazine in issues 51 to 55. That was in 1984. Dave Morris re-released it as a print-on-demand book in 2013, which is awesome, and I really wish more old adventure game books were available in this form. It's a book that can trace a lineage back all the way to the roots of game books in tabletop gaming, and I think that makes it an especially interesting one to examine. I am indebted to Stuart Lloyd for all sorts of things, but in this instance for sending me his copy of The Castle of Lost Souls. Thank you so much, Stuart. This is a slightly shorter format than Fighting Fantasy, with the gamebook running to a svelte 309 paragraphs. There are a few internal illustrations by Leo Hartas, and although it's not credited, the cover shows details from a Caspar David Friedrich painting called The Abbey in the Oakwood. I know this because Caspar David Friedrich is one of my favourite artists, and that's exactly the painting I use as my desktop background. I should do a quick update on my own gamebook before we begin. It is progressing nicely, with the bulk of the design work now done and the map very much taking shape. I don't think there's going to be a vast number of surprises if you've played my previous work, but it's more of a classic fantasy travelogue than any of the other ones I've done. You'll be sailing the high seas and searching for treasure, all that classic pirate stuff, but hopefully with an interesting twist or two along the way. I am trying to follow my own advice and paring the system back to the minimum necessary to tell the story, and hopefully this will make it something that listeners of all ages can enjoy. I'm trying very hard to keep my horror impulses in check on this one and produce something that genuinely could have been sold to kids in the 1980s without any obvious issues. Also, who doesn't love pirates? With the preliminaries out of the way, let's take a look at the rules of The Castle of Lost Souls. We are very much in the territory of supermarket own brand Fighting Fantasy with the rules, which is honestly something I appreciate. There are 3 slightly familiar stats: Vigour, Psi, and Agility. Vigour is your stamina and is generated by 2d6 plus 20. Psi is your magical ability and general psychic power, and it's generated by 1d6 plus 3. Agility is exactly what it sounds like and is also 1d6 plus 3. So far, so good. Fights are handled slightly differently, with each fight giving you the Vigour score of the monster and a very simple table which instructs you to roll 2d6 and compare the results. If you roll below a certain number, the table instructs you to deduct damage from your own character, and if you roll equal or above a certain number, then you deal damage to the baddie. This is simple but fairly powerful, in that it allows you to vary both the chance to hit and the damage dealt to deliver quite a range of different feeling fights. So you can go with a near 50-50 roll to hit, like the monster hits on a 2 to 6, you hit on a 7 to 12, and then have both sides deal the same damage, or you could have the monster have very little chance to hit, but have it deal massive damage when it does so. That's just one obvious example. It's incredibly simple, but there's scope for some storytelling within that system, which I like, and there's something happening every combat round, which I think is incredibly important. You could potentially layer on some additional rules, maybe around rolling doubles. You could add extra entries to the table if you wanted to iterate on this as a system, but it does feel a little bit less powerful than the core Fighting Fantasy system in that sense. I really like that there's something happening every combat round, which is one of the many, many hills on which I might eventually die. You can sometimes flee from combat, which involves an agility test on 2d6. Roll under your agility and you've escaped without harm. Roll over it and you take 3 damage on your way out. All very straightforward. My character has a vigour of 30, a psi of 9 and an agility of 4. I can't help but feel that the psi and agility scores are probably the wrong way round for an ideal character. Much as everyone wants to claim that mental stats are as useful as physical stats most of the time in gamebooks, that simply isn't true. Except in my gamebook, Rats in the Cellar, where I spent a considerable amount of time making sure that they were equally useful, and afterwards swore that I would never do that again. We are an experienced adventurer, which means that we start with some kit, 30 gold sovereigns, actual value unknown, a sword, a tinderbox, a dagger, a bow, and 7 arrows. No provisions, sadly, but I've learned to take these things on the chin. There's also a bit on choosing your character name, which I want to read out because I think it's great. Personalise your adventuring persona by thinking of a heroic name. You might call yourself Lucas Starkiller, or Sir Bergen the Bold, Lady Angela Centauri, or Lin Chun the Black Dragon, or any other name you can think of. Imagine what sort of adventurer you are first. A noble knight, a crafty rogue, a dashing swordsman, or a rugged barbarian perhaps, and then choose a name to reflect your personality. I'm a huge believer in the importance of names for characters. I am wholeheartedly with Dave Morris here, which is why, after much consideration, I've given my character the incredibly heroic name, Bumblesmurf Crumhorn. With all of that out of the way, let's play The Castle of Lost Souls. Prologue. Linton is a prosperous market town that has grown rich and fat on its bustling trade. The jewellers and craftsmen of the town are without peer. Its cuisine is unsurpassed for many leagues. Wealthy patrons ensure a flourishing of the arts. An excellent place to visit for someone with gold to spend. You push away your breakfast platter of gruel and glower at your sagging money pouch. Soon it will be time to move on. Linton is, you decide, altogether too peaceful. No one has need of services such as yours. There is a tall young man crossing the dew-soaked green who shares your despondent mood. "By all the fates," he mutters to himself as he passes, "is there no adventurer of true mettle in this wretched town?" Noting the young man's fine clothes and rings, you leap up and fall into stride beside him, quickly making an introduction. He turns and says keenly, "I am Jasper, head of the wealthy Faze family since my father's untimely death some months ago. My brothers and I require a warrior to undertake an extremely dangerous quest. We have sent word far and wide, and many freebooters have applied for the position. In every case, their boastfulness has exceeded their courage and skill. We are on the point of despair, but if you can prove yourself worthy, then you stand to profit richly." You accompany Jasper to the Faze Mountain, an imposing edifice that stands proudly in some 30 acres of grounds. He takes you to meet his 4 brothers, and they waste no time in beginning their stringent tests. You demonstrate your fighting skill using a wooden practice sword, effortlessly flooring Jasper's ox-like bodyguard. An archery butt is reduced to splintered wood as you send one arrow after another unerringly along the target range. When, blindfolded, you are required to dodge skittles tossed by Jasper and his brothers, your 6th sense and your coordination are shown to be almost superhuman. I mean, not that superhuman. I have the absolute minimum starting agility you can possibly have. You are questioned closely on your past adventures and have no trouble listing the proper way of dealing with any monster from a basilisk to a vampire. With each test, Jasper's smile broadens. Eventually he throws down the book in which he has been keeping notes. "Enough!" he cries. "There can be no doubt. You are the champion we seek." You accompany Jasper to his study, where he explains the quest to you. "The Castle of Lost Souls," he begins abruptly, "is where the demon Slank imprisons the spirits of those who pledge themselves to him." He puts a glass of brandy into your hand. You drain it without thinking. Oh, I could just go a glass of brandy. That would really help with the recording if I drank brandy all the way through. Maybe I'll try that one day as a little extra special bonus. Fantastic fight spot with drinking forfeits. Maybe a one-off special one day. Should point out that it's 11 o'clock in the morning. As I'm saying this, 11 a.m. and I'm talking about drinking brandy. My father, Luther Fays, died a wealthy man, but in his younger days he was a struggling merchant. One day he came across an ornate bronze jar among his trinkets and wares. Unable to remember where he had got it, he read the inscription on the bottom. Immediately, the archdemon Slank stepped forward out of nowhere. After some haggling, my father concluded a deal with Slank, to wit, that he should prosper and grow rich in order to leave wealth for his sons and a dowry for his lovely daughter. For this price, the demon would have his soul. Father died 6 months ago. As you can see from this mansion and the estates, the demon kept his side of the bargain. While father lay on his deathbed, then Slank waited to take his soul to the castle. None of us could see Slank, of course, but we caught the odour of damnation in the room. And father had already told me, his eldest son, about the deal. Just as father breathed his last, a single tear fell from our sister Elvira's eyes onto his face. We learned the rest later, and I'll explain how in a moment. The demon took father's soul through low hills and swamps to where the castle lurks enshrouded by mist. Father heard the demon chuckle as he closed the doors behind them. Gathering his courage, he turned round and cast a teardrop into Slank's face. The demon howled in pain and ran off through the castle, clutching his eye, which now sizzled and smoked where the tear struck it. Father he is, no fool. Seeing that in goodness lay the means to destroy the evil demon, he barricaded himself in the castle library and sat down to work out the necessary weapons. The action of killing Slank can be thought of as a spell which requires 6 components: a crystal ball, a 4-leaf clover, the ashes of a saint, the hair of a nun, the metal fragments from the armour of a chivalrous knight, and a tear from my sister's eye. Luckily, father also found a book of necromancy and used its spells to appear to us in a dream. He told us what to do, and that we should seek out a bold adventurer to be the family's champion. I hardly need say that if you can rescue our father's soul from Slank's castle, we will pay you a sizable fortune in gold and gems. You smile and accept. Jasper reaches into his pocket and takes out a glass vial containing a single glistening teardrop. Here is one of the items you will need. I wish you all speed in finding the other 5. You take the teardrop, record it on your character sheet, and set out at once. You have an uncanny feeling that you are about to become embroiled in the strangest adventure of your life. I am going to write down all of the items I need because the chances of me remembering them all is 0. So we have crystal ball, 4-leaf clover, the ashes of a saint, hair of a nun, metal fragment from the armour of a chivalrous knight, and the teardrop which I already have. A 4-leaf clover should be easy to find. That just requires inordinate patience and a field of clover. Crystal ball doesn't seem too hard. I think the ashes of a saint and the metal fragment from the armour of a chivalrous knight are going to be the sticking points here. Hair of a nun shouldn't be too bad. You just need to find a nun and ask politely, I'm guessing. I mean, you're taking out a demon. Most nuns would be pretty on board with that. I think it's a solid, if unremarkable, opening. You know I'm a big fan of the quest being nice and clear from the outset. Less of a fan of just a big list of made-up names. Slank doesn't strike me as a particularly good demon name. It sounds a little bit too heroic, if you ask me. But, gets the job done, introduces the stakes, and bigs us up as an adventurer, which I always like to see. I like to see the intro give you some sense of the kind of character you are. And here it's gone, you should be up to this. You should absolutely be up to this. You don't have to do that. You can also go, you are a hapless goon of a man or woman or NB. But I think it is important to set the player's expectations of the kind of character they are at the outset. Even if in this case, somewhat undercut by my terrible agility stat. Still, onwards. Resolving to be systematic in your quest, you decide to begin by finding the crystal ball and the four-leaf clover. You remember passing an inn called the Four-Leaf Clover just off the market square, and this seems as good a place as any to commence the search. A short walk across town brings you to the inn. As you enter the tap room, the first thing you notice is a horse brass in the shape of a four-leaf clover, which hangs above the bar. You could try stealing this if you think it will serve your purposes, or you could ask the innkeeper if he knows where there is some clover to be found. I'm sort of tempted by nicking the horse brass, but honestly, if something that just looks like a four-leaf clover would work, why don't I just get some paper and draw a four-leaf clover on it? I mean, for that matter, why don't I just draw a crystal ball, the ashes of a saint, and all the other bits I need? I'm not going to steal the four-leaf clover. I don't think it'll actually help. Asking the innkeeper is appealing, but there's no particular reason why an innkeeper who owns an inn called the Four-Leaf Clover would be able to tell me where some clover is to be found. There's a pub in the town where I went to school called the Red Lion, and I think the landlord would look at me a bit askance if I wandered in and said, "I can't help noticing your sign. Could you please tell me where I can find the nearest lion?" Red for preference. But there are some other people I could talk to in this tavern. There's some gypsies, a group of farm workers having lunch. Now they might know where clover is to be found. Or a trio of adventurers, presumably would-be champions who failed Jasper's test. I'm going to go for the farmers because I think they will know where a field of clover might be located. And props to Dave Morris for giving us 5 choices at the outset. They are wary of you at first because you are from out of town, but when you buy them flagons of ale they soon become quite affable. Deduct 3 gold sovereigns for the drinks. So I'm down to 27 gold sovereigns, and it suggests that a gold sovereign is roughly equivalent to a fiver. You decide to ask if they know where you could get one of the items you need. Will you inquire first about the crystal ball or the four-leaf clover? I will go for the four-leaf clover. "Oh, we don't grow that," one of them replies. "It gives the cows wind." They all laugh uproariously. "Maybe we'd know better if we had another drink inside us." They peer significantly into their now empty tankards. Will you buy them more drinks at a cost of 3 gold sovereigns, or will you take your leave of them? I will buy more drinks. I don't think this is a particularly good plan. I think I'm being taken for a ride by the locals. But I've still got plenty of money, and I am curious to find out whether they do or don't know anything of use. So yes, sovereign's now 24. To your dismay, if not utter surprise, they lapse into drunken rambling and then fall asleep. Annoyed at wasting your money, you mutter an oath and get up from the table. Okay, yeah, seems fair. I have been taken for a ride by the locals. Hopefully you'll have more luck elsewhere. I will approach the innkeeper. The innkeeper says that there are sometimes four-leaf clovers to be found in the beer garden at the back. "Hence the name of the inn," he chuckles. You go out through the door he indicates and find yourself in the beer garden. Several elegantly dressed merchants are seated on a wooden bench. Their merriment turns to incredulity as they watch you get down on your hands and knees and start to peer at the lawn. After nearly an hour, you are on the point of giving up when you spot what you are looking for. With a cry of triumph, you pluck the four-leafed clover. So my instincts were entirely correct. It was just a question of patience. You hear some traders talking about a fete that is being held on the other side of town. You make your way there, thinking that perhaps you will meet someone who knows where you can get a crystal ball. You pass through the south gate of the town and almost at once find yourself in a milling throng of townsfolk and gypsies. Nearby, a group of people have gathered in a ring. They are shouting and cheering, and you stop to see what the noise is about. There is a tall, thin man with a scarlet bandana around his head accepting coins from the people around him. He is taking bets on the outcome of a cockfight. Do you wish to place a bet yourself, or do you decide to pass by? Well, in real life, I don't gamble, because it's a fool's game, and I obviously, like anyone sane, have an absolute abhorrence of blood sports. But I do like seeing a more medieval mindset being presented, and gambling has been one of the most popular forms of entertainment for thousands and thousands and thousands of years. So, in the spirit of trying to fit in with the local ambience, I am going to place a bet on the cockfight. Yeah, I'm much less concerned about the fate of fictional chickens than I am the fate of actual chickens. You can wager up to 3 gold sovereigns on either a proudly strutting bantam or his opponent who is larger but has a tattered comb. So I think we're going to go for the latter one because the tattered comb suggests he's already won at least one bout, and I'm going to wager the full 3 sovereigns. The cock you backed utters its last squawk. You lose the money you wagered. The tall man is taking bets on another fight, but you decide to press on. It was a 50-50, and I instinctively chose the wrong choice because that is my special skill. Always an oddly humbling experience for me playing adventure game books. I mean, I have 3 degrees, one of them from Cambridge, and every time I open a game book, I'm just immediately reminded that I am, in many ways, an absolute buffoon. You are jostled by a crowd of excited townsfolk. A man in a long violet robe catches your eye. He has been performing conjuring tricks, to the obvious delight of his audience who are clapping and throwing silver coins. As you watch, he brushes his fingers together and creates a flare of light and a puff of green smoke. Do you want to pass by, or do you want to wait and buy one of the magical charms he has for sale? Now, I'm going to assume that this is not real magic. I'm going to assume this is stage magic, because if it's real magic, doing magic, actual magic, for a few bits of spare change is just the saddest thing in the world. And if it's stage magic, if it's illusion, anyone who knows me in real life will tell you that I have a loathing of stage magicians that is both irrational and occasionally quite frightening in its intensity. I really, really hate magicians. So I am going to pass straight on by because I don't imagine that the text is going to give me the option to do what my natural instinct would be to do, which is to tell the magician that they've wasted their life learning to do something very hard that has no value. A short, fat man blunders carelessly into you as he emerges from behind a caravan. He murmurs an indistinct apology as he brushes past. Roll 1 die. On a 4 or better, you have your wits about you. On a roll of 1 to 3, your attention is elsewhere. So I roll a 5, so I have my wits about me. Assume this is a cut purse of some kind. You catch sight of the glint of a knife as the fat man tries to cut the strings from your money pouch. Your blood boils. You pull your sword from its scabbard with a bellow of rage. The cut purse attempts to escape by running between 2 tents, but a pile of crates blocks his way and he has to turn and face your wrath. Cut purse has a vigour of 9, and I need a 5 or more on 2d6 to hit him. So 2 to 4 he hits me for 3, 5 to 12 I hit him for 3. So nice easy fight to start us off, always appreciated. I'm going to roll some dice. Oh, it's nice and quick, this combat system. It's got that going for it. Yeah, I took no damage. I have stabbed the unfortunate cut purse repeatedly with my sword. You check the little man's pockets and find several pilfered money pouches. His ill-gotten gains amount to 17 gold sovereigns. So we now have 38 gold sovereigns. More than we started with. That's good. He is also wearing a cornelian ring in the shape of a skull, which you may take if you wish. Do you love a skull ring? Remember to note anything you take in the appropriate box on your character sheet. Thank you for the reminder. And genuinely a useful reminder. Early doors. You find some grass to clean the blood from your sword, then step out from behind the tents as if nothing had happened. As if I hadn't just murdered a man. You see a young couple outside the beer tent, a swarthy gypsy lad and his plump country maid. You ask where you could find someone with a crystal ball, and without looking away from the eyes of his paramour, the lad replies, You want Gypsy Girl. She's the best fortune teller for 20 leagues or more. He points towards her caravan. You climb the steps of the brightly painted caravan, push aside the silk curtain across the doorway, and cautiously enter. It is dimly lit. There is a strange herbal smell, incense perhaps. Exotic and colourful fabrics hang down in drapes, disguising the size of the caravan's interior. You feel heady and disorientated, as though you had stepped from the noise and bustle outside into another world. As your eyes adjust to the gloom, you notice with a start a figure who sits at a velvet-covered table. She is clad in the same brilliant colours that adorn the caravan. You are pleasantly surprised to discover that Gypsy Gale is no wizened crone, but a ravishing, sultry beauty with red gold hair and long-lashed eyes of sea green. Bit heteronormative, assuming that this book is being played by straight lads, but statistically probably accurate, so I'm not going to be too hard on it. She beckons you forward. Finally, you notice her crystal ball on the table. It shimmers and reflects all the myriad colours in the room. You have fleetingly considered several plans, and now you must decide which to use. Do you want to ask her to tell your fortune? Suggest she reads her own fortune? Try to steal her crystal ball, or invite her to join you for a look around the fete? I like that there's an option for just utterly smitten with her, and maybe instead of going on this adventure, I just want to romance this sultry redhead. Fair enough. The heart wants what the heart wants. I'm amused by the notion of making her read her own fortune, or asking that she read her own fortune, because presumably it'll say you will meet a tall, dark man with a sword who will menace you into giving up your crystal ball. It is far and away the funniest option, so that is the one I'm going to go for. She glances whimsically into her crystal ball and instantly perceives your intention of acquiring it. I was correct. "Foolish thief!" she snarls. With a snap of her fingers, she summons two burly gypsies who brandish wide-bladed knives. You cannot get to the doorway. This is a fight to the death. So the first gypsy has 12 vigour, and he's hitting me on a 2 to 6. I'm hitting him on a 7 to 12. We're both doing 3 vigour damage. So I should win, but I will, I imagine, take a certain amount of damage on the way. In the cramped caravan, they do not have space to come at you together. So, with that in mind, I'm going to roll some dice. I have defeated the gypsy. He reduced me to 27 vigour, hitting me only once, so that was a pretty good fight. Slightly concerned I'm getting all of my good rolling out of the way early doors. The other gypsy lunges at you over the fallen body of his brother. Hatred fills his eyes, and Gale screams at him to slay you. Second gypsy has a vigour of 12, and is hitting me on a 2 to 5. I'm hitting him on a 6 to 12. We're both dealing 3 vigour damage. Once again, I'm going to roll some dice. That fight, despite being easier on paper, went much worse, and I was reduced to 15 vigour, but I have still won. Gale has retreated to the shadows at the rear of the caravan. Her eyes glint at you from the near darkness. You wipe the gore from your sword on the velvet tablecloth and lift the crystal ball from its stand. When you bid her farewell, bit of a heel move, she spits on the floor and rasps something unpleasant in her own language. You leave quickly before she can work her witchcraft upon you. You now have the crystal ball you needed. Make sure you have noted it down on your character sheet. Do you have the 4-leaf clover as well? I do. So we are fully halfway there. I don't know why I couldn't have just tried to buy the crystal ball. Now that you possess the crystal ball, the teardrop and the 4-leaf clover, all you need is the fragment of a chivalrous knight's armour. Wait a second, don't I need ashes of a saint and some nun hair? I won't worry about that. This is presumably the only one we think we can get in this locality. So 2 options: go to the joust being held tomorrow, or go to see Hrothgar, a scholar who is renowned for his private collection of arms and armour. I feel as though there'll be fragments of armour all over the place from the joust, and also I'll be able to see which of the various knights is actually chivalrous. I'm going to do that. You walk around the field where the joust is taking place. Amongst the various knights parading back and forth on horseback or cuffing their indolent squires, you can see a very gallant-looking knight with a noble lady. Using the most courtly and chivalrous phrases, he is declaring his boundless love for her. She offers him a band of green silk finished with gold, the symbol of her favour, and he accepts with a self-effacing smile. You have found your man. You approach him. Will you explain your quest and ask for his help? Steal his helmet when he isn't looking, or resort to low cunning? I mean, I feel as though stealing his helmet is the funniest. Running off with the helmet giggling. Too slow, Mr. Knight. If he's properly chivalrous, he'll just give me, like, a bit of his armour. So that's what I'm going to do. He is only too glad to be able to assist you in your noble undertaking. He holds out his gauntlet for you to take, but you point out that you only need a small fragment. Swiftly he shaves a sliver from his helmet with the sharp edge of his sword. Excellent. This is going very well. Apart from the bit where I got almost beaten to death by two gypsies. You return to the Fays' mansion, now with 4 of the 6 items you need for your quest. Only the saint's ashes and the hair of a nun remains to be found, but Jasper suggests that since the town is not an especially holy place, you may have more luck obtaining the last 2 items on your way to the Castle of Lost Souls. You spend a couple of days studying maps and travellers' accounts, planning your route to the Demon's Keep. If you are wounded, regain 2 vigour for the rest. 2 whole vigour, eh? Excellent. Vigour now 17. It'll be fine. The evening before you are due to set out, you gaze from the library windows towards the setting sun. In that direction lies the castle. But in this world, or the next? You yawn and close the compendium of charts you have been studying. Whatever awesome perils await you, there is little to be gained from dwelling upon them now. You rise early and take breakfast with Jasper. His brothers are still in bed and the mansion seems eerily quiet. Hardly a word passes between the two of you. Jasper knows he may be sending you to your death, and the coffers of gold he has promised appear a paltry reward now. The door creaks behind you, and the butler enters with your weapons and backpack. "I have had Mortlake pack some provisions for your journey," says Jasper, "and you will also find in your rucksack a small pot containing 4 applications of a magical salve of healing." The salve of healing is a rather foul-smelling preparation made from rancid milk, troll fat and rotting vegetables, which actually has miraculous healing properties. Spreading it on your wounds after a fight will restore 4 vigour points. The salve will not increase your vigour above its normal score, of course. Record the salve of healing on your character sheet, and remember you only have enough for 4 applications. Pretty handy. You take your belongings, and Jasper accompanies you to the mansion gates. "I wish you good luck in your venture," he tells you as you walk. "I can offer you no help or advice, save these 2 snippets of information. First, I have heard that the 2 principal goblin tribes of the Mungo Hills through which you must pass are the Drans and the Cabagoos, and that one or other of the tribe are inveterate liars." Are we going to do the 2 doors bit from Labyrinth? Is it going to be one of those where they go, "Congratulations, your cunning strategy of asking us whether the other tribe would say the right answer has proved fruitful. We are now going to eat you because you've just really irritated us." Secondly, it is said that strange phantasms can appear in the mists enveloping the swamps of Bosch which surrounds Slank's castle. These phantasms can cause a traveller no hardship as long as one disregards them. He reaches up and removes a talisman from around his neck, which he hands to you. "Wear this, for if you find my father, he will recognise it and know that you come to help him." He swings the gate open and offers you his hand. "Now, farewell." You make your way through the town towards the west gate. The streets are beginning to come alive, with traders laying out their wares. Sunlight slants across the rooftops, and there is a cool, refreshing breeze. Somewhere on your journey you must find a saint's ashes and the hair of a nun. But for now all that occupies your thoughts is that it is a glorious morning, and you are about to embark on another challenging adventure. Do you have a sword? I do! Oh, terrifying to think you can lose your sword early doors. You set out at a brisk pace and soon leave the fields and meadows around the town far behind you. After some time you come to a river, and seeing a bridge only a few 100 metres away, you stroll along the bank to it. As you are about to cross, however, a tall, slim man in silver-grey robes appears from under the arch of the bridge and calls up to you that you must pay a toll of 4 gold sovereigns to cross here. Will you pay him the money, or will you ignore him and cross anyway? I don't feel as though actual toll men live under their bridges. That strikes me as the sort of thing that a criminal does, so I'm going to ignore him. With breathtaking speed and agility, he leaps up and alights on the bridge in front of you. As he does so, he draws a long curved sword from the scabbard slung across his back. The fine for non-payment of the toll is 7 gold sovereigns, he says with a wry smile, and the penalty for non-payment of the fine is... He glances meaningfully at the gleaming naked blade of his sword. Will you now pay him the 7 gold sovereigns, or will you fight? I really want to stab him. But I've got plenty of gold, so I will pay him the 7 gold sovereigns, reducing my total gold to 31. You grudgingly hand him the 7 gold sovereigns. Remember to deduct them from your total cash. You can now pass by and continue on your way, or ask where you could find the 2 items you still need. I will ask him where I can find the 2 items. He scratches the back of his neck. Don't know about the strand of hair, he says after some thought. Don't nuns shave their heads when they enter a convent anyway? But there is some sort of shrine not too far from here, where some old holy man was buried. Maybe he was a saint, who knows? The toll collector gives you directions, and you set off in search of the shrine. Nuns do traditionally cut their hair really short. Makes wimples easier to wear, and obviously it's a sign of humility, the same as monks shaving in a tonsure. But yes, onwards to the shrine. That doesn't mean that they don't ever grow hair again, though. They have to reshave it from time to time, so that should make it, if anything, easier to find nun hair in a nunnery. The shrine consists of a simple marble dome, supported by 3 thick pillars. Within, on a table of rock, you can see a verdigris-stained urn. As you step between the pillars, a silvery light appears out of nowhere and halos the urn. Do you wish to stay, or would you rather flee and continue on towards the hills? Well, still need the relic, and ashes do come in urns traditionally, so we will stay. You stand in a sacred place. The gods themselves look into your heart and see all your past deeds. Have you slain anyone in your quest so far, except for a fat cut purse at the fete? Yes, I killed 2 people who tried to stop me thieving a crystal ball. Whoops. Though you believe your actions were justified, they did start it, technically. The gods rank you as a murderer. They do not want their shrine sullied by your presence. They dispatch one of their servants to deal with you, a giant, halberd-wielding warrior clad in white armour who steps from a shining rent in the air in front of you. You are so taken aback by his sudden and miraculous appearance that you get no chance to drink a potion if you have any. So, our Angelic Executioner has a vigour of 15, and it hits me on a 2 to 6. I hit it on a 7 to 12. So, I can flee, but let's see how the fight goes first. I'm not particularly keen on fleeing with my agility of 4, but if I get down to my last hit, it could make a difference. Anyway, regardless, I'm going to roll some dice. I have defeated the Angelic Executioner. It reduced me to 11 vigour. I don't know what I was worrying about. If you beat the Angelic Executioner, he turns into a stream of clear water and flows away. I am going to take the opportunity to use 2 doses of my salve and return my my vigour, legally distinct from stamina, to 19. You reach into the silvery glow and take the urn. Peeking within, you see that it contains a handful of ashes. Somehow you know that these are the mortal remains of a saint. You put the urn in your backpack and set off again towards the hills. It's kind of like a Ian Livingstone scavenger hunt, except all of the items so far have been really easy to get hold of. You trudge on for many miles. It is late in the afternoon and the sun is dipping towards the rolling Mungo Hills ahead of you. You are trying to estimate whether you will be into the hills by nightfall when you see a skirmish of some kind on the road ahead. Cautiously you advance until you can discern the details. A small robber band has attacked a group of wayfarers. 2 guards lie dead in the dust, and the third is battling against hopeless odds to prevent the robbers from getting to the coach he was accompanying. You see an old man cowering behind the coach. So do I want to help the guard, pick off the robbers with my bow, or avoid getting involved? I guess I'll try and use my bow. I haven't had a chance to use it yet. That strikes me as quite exciting. You level your bow and loose 5 arrows in rapid succession. Roll 1 die for each arrow. On a roll of 3 or better, it finds its target, but on a roll of a 1 or a 2, it misses. So, we need to hit with 3 or more out of 5, which we should do. So, arrow 1 is a hit. Arrow 2 is a hit. Arrow 3 is a miss. Arrow 4 is a miss. So it all comes down to this final arrow, which is a hit. Hooray! A little bit of tension, still succeeded. Guess I need to deduct 5 arrows. A shower of arrows finds their mark, throwing the robbers into confusion. They do not wait around long enough to see that it is a lone archer who attacks them. They break into a mad dash for the woods and are soon lost from sight. You walk to the scene of the ambush. The guard has taken a mortal wound, and he looks up at you with dimming eyes. "My thanks, stranger," he gasps. "Your rescue came too late for me, I fear." His breath rattles in his throat and he falls back. An elegant velvet slipper emerges from the coach, and you glance over as a slender damsel steps down. She surveys the carnage for a moment, then turns a pouting frown on the broken axle of the coach. The old man gets up from where he lay, cowering in the dust, and approaches you, drawing his dignity about him like a cloak. "We are indebted to you," he says haughtily. "Had you not intervened when you did, things might have turned out for the worse. I am Gorbran, servant of the worshipful Sisters of Pure Adoration. This lady is Norwenna, who I am taking to join the convent." You are not one to ignore the gifts of Providence. Pointing out that Gorbran and Norwenna now lack guards for their journey, you appoint yourself their escort until they reach the convent. You escort Gorbran and Norwenna safely on foot to the convent. The Sisters of Pure Adoration are very grateful for all the help you have given. You receive a blessing from the Mother Superior herself, and if you are subject to a curse, it is now lifted. Also, if you are wounded, they use their herbal remedies to restore your vigour to its normal score. After a hearty meal, you are given a comfortable bed for the night. So, vigour now 30. You arise before daybreak and join the nuns in the first service of the day, as much from politeness as from piety. You also notice a group of soldiers praying in the chapel. You did not see them when you arrived yesterday, and as you file out of the chapel, you strike up a conversation with their captain. He confirms that they arrived during the night. "Patrols on the western roads have been doubled," he tells you over breakfast. "The countryside hereabouts is rife with brigands and murderous monsters." Do you have a jade horn-shaped amulet? I do not. You soon tire of the captain's monomaniacal ranting about law and retribution. Especially tiring as I've killed 3 people. Plus the brigands. You excuse yourself and go off in search of the Mother Superior. She is an altogether more agreeable person, and when you ask her if she could supply you with a nun's hair, she laughs merrily. "Norwenna has just had her head shaved to join our order," she says. She glides away and soon returns with a long, black strand of hair. You put this in your backpack and she shows you the door. "You are always welcome here," she tells you. You turn at the gate to wave to her and see the captain watching you like a mad hawk from an upper window. With an uneasy shiver, you hurry westwards. So, all of the items found. I am going to break off the recording there so as to leave something undiscovered for those who wish to actually play Castle of the Lost Souls. I'm having a nice time with it. It feels very much like a kind of supermarket own brand fighting fantasy book, and that's no bad thing. Yeah, it's nicely written enough. I don't think it's spectacularly written. I think Dave Morris has written better prose, but his prose is certainly very functional, showing its age a little bit in some of the sexual politics, but this from the early 80s, you kind of accept that sort of thing. A bit more from an old book, I'd come down on it like a ton of bricks if it happened in a modern book, because I just don't think there's any need for it in this day and age. But, product of its time, the systems all work perfectly well. It doesn't stand out as spectacularly exciting so far, but I am having a nice time with it. And do you know what? Quite often that's enough. So I'm going to go away and finish playing it, maybe even beat it, who knows, on my own time. I'll be back for you in just a few seconds with some closing remarks. Tatty bye. I have completed Castle of Lost Souls. Those of you who like to keep score at home will be delighted to hear that in classic Hieronymus J. Doom fashion, I died shortly after turning the recording off. I am nothing if not consistent. On this occasion, I came across some nocturnal monsters attracted by the moonlight gleaming on my shiny sword. I tried to distract them by lighting my lantern, and this got them very excited and they trampled me to death. Turned out I did actually have the item I needed to send them packing, but I'd recorded it in the most unhelpful way possible on my character sheet, so I didn't realise. Classic me. Since then, I've managed to beat the Castle of Lost Souls, which is actually not especially difficult. This is one where, if you're not an idiot, then you can probably get through it on your first playthrough. It's an odd one to review because it's very much a meat and potatoes adventure game book. You've got a bunch of items to find on a journey to the castle, and then you need to explore the dangers of the castle before a final confrontation with a demon slank. It feels exactly like a supermarket own brand fighting fantasy novel, which is very much the overall vibe of the Golden Dragon series as a whole, I think. I wasn't aware that I'd played this before, but I looked up a scan of the original version online, and the logo and the cover triggered that sort of Proustian rush. So I probably got it out of the library at some stage in my youth and played it. Now, on the one hand, there is nothing here that you won't have seen before. Wandering across the world, completing a shopping list before doing a dungeon at the end is perhaps the single most common plot in gamebooks. Feels like at least 60% of fighting fantasy gamebooks follow this basic structure. And this many episodes into the podcast, it's a little hard to get too excited about. It's also exactly the same structure that Morris used in the Hero Quest book of his we covered a while back. That said, it's a classic because it works, and from a technical point of view, there is very little to complain about here. Dave Morris can churn out this sort of thing in his sleep, and if the Castle of Lost Souls is thoroughly unremarkable, it's also solidly entertaining. There are a few things that warrant a closer examination, much like the cat is currently making a closer examination of my feet. The first is the difficulty level, which is pitched a bit lower than most fighting fantasy books and a hell of a lot lower than any of the recent books we've covered. It's not hard to get all of the different bits you need to defeat Slank, and most of the items have multiple paths to get to them. The language of the book is also fairly simple, and overall I think it points to this book being aimed at a younger audience than fighting fantasy. You might say that it acts as a transitional form between choose-your-own-adventure books and more obviously role-playing inspired books. If anyone listening has children who are maybe a bit young for fighting fantasy but have outgrown choose-your-own-adventure books, then I think this would be the perfect place for them to start. The opening is very forgiving, a lot of the solutions to the puzzles are very clearly telegraphed, and it's also happy to let you cheat. There's a hard riddle, but it just straight up gives you the answer and asks if you got it right. If you need to cheat, which I did, it is genuinely quite a hard riddle. There's a sly reference in the text where the riddler expresses surprise that anyone could get the right answer without cheating. That is a lovely touch. I felt a reflexive twinge of guilt, which I definitely wouldn't have done if I'd actually got the answer right, but it didn't impede me in trying to find out what happened. And I only cheated because it was quite late in the day and I'd already checked that the wrong answer was an instant death paragraph. I have to cheat at gamebooks. It's part of my job. The castle, once you get there, is considerably more dangerous than the approach and is very much one of those weird magical spaces that you only get in role-playing games. It's got multiple paths through it, which I appreciate, and the various tricks and traps are nicely presented. There's a recurring motif of Slank disguising himself as characters in the castle to try and trick you into doing stupid things, but you can spot him a mile off by the fact that he can't disguise his messed up eye. It's hardly subtle, but I think younger readers will enjoy picking up on the hint. I surmise this because I enjoyed picking up on the hint, and I'm 45. There's a meta-pleasure in seeing the world presented as being internally consistent, and that is what I am telling myself about why I was pleased every time I noticed that an NPC only had one eye. The actual castle is my favourite kind of dungeon because it's quite easy to explore, it's not too large, and it's filled with all manner of bizarre things. This is the bit of dungeon design I really enjoy as a player, just a series of rooms filled with magical nonsense. A room where a mask is secreted beneath a floor made of ice. Hope you killed the magically animated bearskin rug in the previous room, otherwise you're going to get pretty damn cold. This room is filled with darkness, and if you try and take the torch from the wall to investigate it, then it just opens a trapdoor beneath your feet to an oubliette where Slank the demon will pretend to be a prisoner in order to try and trick you into putting on a pair of thumbscrews for him. There's loads of this sort of thing, and I honestly love it. I really enjoy that kind of magical escape room design, and I think it's because I know that personally I'm very bad at designing that sort of thing. When I design dungeons, I'm always a little bit too obsessed about making the space feel livable and having a reason to exist when adventurers aren't bludgeoning their way through it. When I run tabletop games, I don't do a lot of dungeoneering. My games are notable for having fairly complex plots and lots of NPCs who are all just following their own agendas. If I design a wizard's lair, there's always a bit of my brain going, this tower would be a pain in the bottom to actually live in. How is this sorceress going to receive Amazon deliveries? So instead I write a sorceress who lives in a fairly normal house rather than a wizard's tower, maybe with a magical burglar alarm, and focus instead on how she's opened a portal to the elemental plane of Earth in the basement, and how the resulting influx of precious jewels has completely destabilised the local economy. I understand intellectually how to write mad dungeons filled with stupidly elaborate traps, but I struggle to bring myself to actually do it. And it means that when I'm playing a mad dungeon, I'm able to just enjoy it rather than thinking about how I'd improve on it, because I know I probably wouldn't be able to. I think there's a place for dungeons that make sense too. When I wrote my most recent game book, I was very pleased with how I presented the various mini-dungeons as spaces that had an internal logic to them. There's a sewer area that's specifically mapped out to function as a sewer in the absence of adventurers. And then I had the sadistic game designers, who are the villains, layer some challenges on top of that space. But I would love to be able to design the kind of weird nonsense that Dave Morris and Ian Livingstone seem to be able to generate with apparent ease. And for all that the design is quite simple, you can tell that Dave Morris knows his craft. The choices that you make all feel quite impactful, and he's clever at providing more choices when the stakes are lower. The tavern at the start has 5 different options, and they're all quite tempting. But later on, when it's a matter of life and death, the choices tend to narrow down to binaries. This is subtle, but it's something that nicely reflects how more stressful situations tend to concentrate the mind. I like the way this creates the idea that you have more time to consider your options when you have the leisure to reflect, and less time when a monster is about to eat your face. And there is some actual psychology behind this. Humans do get more predictable under some kinds of stress. There's a reason it's not called the fight, flight or rummage in your pockets reflex. Binaries are a good way to show panic, and if you wanted to get really advanced, you could give the player binary choices in stressful situations, and then, once it has been resolved, show environmental details that reveal that there may have been other alternatives if only they'd had the time to think. It's not 100% perfect. There is a maze which feels a bit cheeky in a book only 309 paragraphs long. My default assumption is that mazes exist mostly to pad the section count when the writer has come in under. They're easy to insert into the narrative, they are unlikely to break anything later in the book, and they're also incredibly easy to write when a deadline looms. This is a mirror maze, and it's every bit as dull as you would expect, but it does at least have the meta strategy where, after you've wandered about a bit, it's just about looking at the 4 options to see if there's one you haven't been to yet. Keep trying new sections and you'll get out eventually. And the text is aware that this is the strategy people will be using as well, which is nice, but honestly the maze adds nothing to the narrative, and its only saving grace is that it only requires time to solve rather than effort. My loathing for mazes remains undimmed, but at least I didn't feel like I needed to get the pen and paper out to make a map. That is the very thinnest of silver linings, but it does technically make it slightly better than some mazes I've encountered, so I will pay the maze that compliment, albeit through gritted teeth. Once you've got through all of the surreal and over-elaborate challenges, you'll need to face the demon Slank. This can play out in a number of different ways depending on how you've done in the preceding adventure. If everything has gone exactly right, then you can off him without needing to roll a single dice. If things have gone less well, then you will need to throw hands with the demon at least once, but potentially twice, if you've really made a hash of things. One of the fights is really very difficult, but the second is a bit more doable. Cashing in all the items you've found always feels very rewarding, and it feels even more rewarding when you do it in stages rather than all at once. Here there's essentially 3 item checks, one of which happens to be before you actually face the big boss. Multi-stage final confrontations are a good thing because it makes them feel more special than the standard encounters, even if the systems are broadly the same. Even though it's quite likely you'll have all the items you need, I still felt that pleasant rush of dopamine from being patted on the head 3 times in a row by the text. I've said many times that I prefer a difficult fight that players can cheat through if they just want to get to the end as the consequence for not having the right items, and this is a superbly executed example of doing just that. It's something I've harped on before, but it occurred to me as I was writing the notes for this episode that writing difficult books can reflect a degree of confidence bordering on arrogance on the part of the writer. If you build an escape into your final fight, you're giving the reader permission to rush to the end and then put the book down even if there's a bunch of things you'd really like them to discover. The swine. If you put in a bunch of anti-cheating measures and make the book really hard, you're demanding that the player engage with it on your terms. Now that's not necessarily a bad thing. I'm a big fan of FromSoft games like Dark Souls and Bloodborne, which make no concessions to the player whatsoever and demand to be engaged with on their own very specific terms. They aren't for everyone, they know it, and they don't care. There's an artistic vision there that refuses to be compromised, and a part of me likes that. However, I still think that FromSoft games would be better if they had difficulty options, accessibility options, and ways to cheat, because however pure your artistic vision is and however unsullied it might be by filthy casuals, I think you can actually have your cake and eat it too. You can make concessions without changing the intended way to play a game. It doesn't have to be a binary thing. Not to mention the hardest truth of all, which is that most games aren't Bloodborne. Bloodborne is so good that on an artistic level it justifies its high and unrelenting difficulty. I still think accessibility, especially to people with disabilities, is more important, but you can make the case that in a vacuum, Bloodborne is a piece of art so good that it demands to be experienced on its own terms. But most games aren't Bloodborne. And most game books aren't Death Trap Dungeon, and that's the thing. If I genuinely believed that I'd produced a difficult game book so good it could only be properly experienced as I intended, then of course I would fill it with anti-cheat measures. But I lack the self-confidence to ever think that I'd make something that good. Also, I'm aware that even if it was good enough and people bought it, then If enough people bought it, someone would post spoilers and render the whole anti-cheat thing completely pointless. So I don't. Let's move on. The combat system works extremely well. It's nice that it doesn't require you to remember the enemy's attack score like Fighting Fantasy, and if anything emphasises my ongoing cognitive decline, it's that sentence. I mean, realistically, it's not difficult to remember the enemy's attack score, but it adds to the cognitive load of combat, and that can have unintended consequences, because the more you're thinking about remembering the attack score of the opponent, the less you're potentially thinking about the consequences if your opponent hits you. It's a very small thing, but it does actually have an impact. The combat system here has a decent amount of power to it as well. It's trivial to adjust the damage and the chance to hit, and Morris demonstrates that you can iterate on it to good effect with special rules. A giant cobra will try to hypnotise you if you roll a double 1 on the table, and a clockwork monstrosity will gradually get easier to hit as it runs down. You can add additional fighters to combats quite easily by having results on the table where both enemies hit you, though it does mean you have to go to a new table once one of those fighters is down, so Fighting Fantasy has the edge there in parsimonious design terms. I had already decided to do combat with tables in my next gamebook, and this absolutely affirms that there's enough power in it as an approach to create fights that feel exciting and feel different. Fighting Fantasy is still my favourite system, but this runs a close second. It's arguably better than the system in Way of the Tiger because it doesn't throw up so many null results. You could actually combine this approach with Way of the Tiger by having different attacks lead to different tables, which would clean up the messy elements of Way of the Tiger while still preserving the feeling that choosing how to approach fights matters. The stats are a bit more mixed. Agility is next to meaningless, and Psi isn't much better, though there is at least one monster that drains Psi instead of Vigour, and that's a nice wrinkle. There's also a required Psi test right at the end, so a decent Psi score is more or less required, but happily there's also a chance to get some improvement to your score if you make the right choices, so at least Morris has accounted for that, which is good. Honestly, the gamebook wouldn't have been any worse for not having agility in it at all, but I suppose the system was already set before this book was written, and you have to work with the systems you've got. That is more or less everything I have to say about the Castle of Lost Souls, except to say it's a pity there is so little of the original artwork in place. I had a look at the original release, and Leo Hartas' work is really interesting. It's very much more influenced by children's illustrations than classic fantasy art, but that gives it a unique look. Hartas' work feels more like it would be at home in something by Roald Dahl than in a game book, but it's really exuberant and filled with character and expressiveness that I very much like. The absence of the art is a small complaint though, given that this is a book that's been out of print for so long. I'm just grateful that it's available again, and while it might be more of a curio than an essential purchase, it's still a very enjoyable game book for what it is, and it's a half-forgotten piece of game book history, and preserving that is a good thing. That is all for this episode. Join me again in a couple of weeks when I'll be taking on the next Fighting Fantasy book, Night Dragon, by our old friend Keith Martin. I hope you will join me for that. In the meantime, I hope everyone who went to Fighting Fantasy Fest had a really good time. It sounds like it was a really great event from what I've seen online. You can contact me by email at hjdoomretrofun, all one word, @gmail.com, or by following me on Blue Sky at hjdoom. Thank you very much for listening. Take care, and I'll see you soon.